So you want to try out the Augmentation Evoker so that you can be part of the meta. Well, you better get intimately familiar with your Ebon Might ability. As I'm sure you've heard, the playstyle for Augmentation will be a bit new to anything you played before, with it being a support class and not strictly fitting into one of the tank, DPS, or healer roles. With being a support spec, your existence is to bring the Ebon Might buff to your group or raid. Think of Ebon Might as your core ability, with everything else you do supporting the upkeep and extending the duration of this buff. To emphasize its importance, Blizzard even gave Aug Evokers a bar on your character icon that shows you the duration of the buff. So let's take a close look at what this buff can bring. Ebon Might increases the primary stat of the 4 nearest allies by 10% of your own, while also giving you a 20% damage boost for 10 seconds. Your Deep Breath and Empower spells increase the duration of the buff, and it has a 30-second cooldown. Furthermore, the passive ability Close as Clutchmates makes the Ebon Might buff 20% more effective when you aren't in a raid. This changes the primary stat buff to 12% and your damage boost to 24%. On top of that, the 10.1 raid tier set 4-piece bonus adds another 1% to the primary stat buff, making it 13% with the Close as Clutchmates passive. Because the primary stat buff is based off your own primary stat, which is intellect, you want as much intellect in your gear as you can get. This means that item level will pretty much always be the most important factor, since higher item level pieces will have the most intellect. The same goes for trinkets. Get a couple trinkets with intellect on them, or ones that have a proc or on-use effect that gives a large primary stat boost, like in the cases of Iridius Fragment or Natharian's Call to Chaos. Ebon Might does not snapshot your stats when you cast it. It updates every couple seconds, so if you get a trinket proc in the middle of the buff, then it'll be a huge bonus. The other part of Ebon Might is the 20% damage boost that you get from having it up. This greatly adds to the importance of this buff, since it's such a big DPS loss if you don't have it up. Now let's see how much uptime we can get. Like the tooltip says on our Empower spells, Fire Breath and Upheaval, they will extend the buff by 2 seconds each. Your Deep Breath or Breath of Eons will give 5 seconds of Ebon Might, and your Essence Spender Eruption will also add 1 second to the duration per cast. In addition to the base buff extensions they give, if the spell crits, then you get an additional 50% of the duration due to the passive Sands of Time. So for example, if Upheaval crits, then you get 3 seconds, and if your Eruption crits, then you'll get 1.5 seconds added to Ebon Might. Next, let's take a look at our mastery, which is Time Walker. It does 2 things. The first is that when you cast an Empower spell, it gives an ally a 10-second versatility buff called Shifting Sands, and the other piece is that it increases the duration of Shifting Sands, Breath of Eons, and other helpful aura buffs by a certain amount based on how much mastery you have. I wish it said it specifically, but Ebon Might is part of the other helpful auras, so you can increase Ebon Might's duration through mastery. And as you might have guessed, this makes mastery our most valuable secondary stat by far. Try and go for mastery on every piece of gear if you can. Fortunately, if you've been playing Devastation, then you probably already have a good amount of mastery on your gear. After mastery, it's a bit of a toss-up between haste and crit. Haste makes the rotation faster, while crit helps extending Ebon Might because of Sands of Time. So where else can we get some buff extension? We covered spells and stats, so let's get into the talent tree. The only talent that would help us increase uptime is Time Skip and its supporting talents. Time Skip is a 3-minute cooldown that essentially reduces all cooldowns by 20 seconds during a 2-second channel. If you go for its supporting talents, those are Tomorrow Today, which adds 1 second to the channel and would make Time Skip reduce all cooldowns by 30 seconds, or Interwoven Threads, which makes Time Skip a passive ability and always gives you a flat 10% cooldown reduction. Choosing Interwoven Threads would make Ebon Might a 27-second cooldown and in turn increase its overall uptime. Going with Time Skip allows you to easily extend Ebon Might's duration, since you'll be able to use Ebon Might and your Empower spells almost back to back, while also shaving off a good chunk of Breath of Eon's cooldown. Depending on how much mastery you have and how many crits you get, it is possible to get 100% uptime, at least for the first 40 to 45 seconds, especially with Time Skip. After that, you'll probably have a small gap, since Breath of Eon's will be on cooldown and you won't get the extra 5 seconds from it. Alright, so hopefully you you have a decent understanding of Ebon Might and the importance of having high uptime on it. I wanted to briefly go over how Ebon Might and Shifting Sands do their targeting. These spells have a priority targeting system to them. First, whoever you cast Prescience on will receive the Ebon Might buff. You can maintain Prescience on 2 allies, which will typically be your top DPS players. After that, Ebon Might will pick the closest DPS players to you that do not have Ebon Might. If it can't find DPS players, then it will be cast on the nearest non-DPS players. With Shifting Sands, it'll go for the nearest players with Ebon Might up and no Shifting Sands buff. Then it'll choose the closest DPS players without Shifting Sands, and then non-DPS players without Shifting Sands. Because of this targeting system, you'll want to pay attention to which DPS players you are standing near. If there are specific players you want to buff with Ebon Might or Shifting Sands, then stand near them for the best chance of them receiving the buff. Let's move on to talking about the rotation for an Augmentation Evoker. After doing some testings, I found them to have one of the most forgiving rotations of any class I've played. It pretty much revolves around doing what you can to maintain as much uptime on Ebon Might as possible. Pre-pull, have Prescience up on your DPS allies, throw Blistering Scales on the tank, and don't forget Source of Magic on the healer. Start by casting Ebon Might, then cast your Empower spells while Ebon Might is up, spend Essence with Eruption, preferably while Ebon Might is up, and fill in the rest with Living Flame or Azure Strike if you like that spell better. You'll want to use Breath of Eons in the rotation as well, and if you can, you'll want to line it up when your DPS allies blow their cooldowns to give them an even bigger burst. I want to emphasize that you really do not want to cast your Empower spells outside of Ebon Might. You'll lose out on the buff extension and the massive damage buff, which is only further exacerbated by the 2-piece set bonus that buffs your Empower spells by an additional 30% with Ebon Might. I did say the rotation is forgiving, but casting an Empower spell without Ebon Might up is probably one of the biggest mistakes you can make. Now let's quickly review what we covered. We covered the spells that extend Ebon Might's duration and how Sands of Time increases the duration bonus if they crit. We went over our stat priorities and how Mastery can help with keeping Ebon Might up. We looked at the talent Time Skip and its supporting talents to understand how it can help with maintaining Ebon Might. We did a quick rundown about how Ebon Might and Shifting Sands do their targeting, and covered the basics of our rotation and the importance of casting Empower spells with Ebon Might up. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover in this video. I intended to do a full guide when I started this video, then realized that talking about Ebon Might alone would take up a lot of time, and since it is the most important part of playing an Augmentation Evoker, I wanted to make sure new players that want to try Augmentation really understand everything that goes into maintaining Ebon Might. Thanks for watching, and I hope this helped. If you liked the video, then consider liking and subscribing. I cover a wide range of random topics on World of Warcraft. And until next time, take care.